Great to see you all early this Monday morning. Yeah, we'll just have some of our research leaders take a seat. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I am going to stand behind the podium. It's a little formal, but we need it for the video and the live web streaming. So I want to welcome everyone here. It's great to see all of you here to find out about Healthy Brains for Healthy Lives. I think most of you know who I am. I'm the Vice Principal for Research and Innovation, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this town hall about Healthy Brains for Healthy Lives. And for those of you who don't know, this is a project which was awarded to McGill, $84 million from the federal government, from the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, which we fondly call CFREF, and in French it has a better name, Apogee. This is $84 million, and I'm fond of saying $84 million at least, because there's, as I'll show you, there's funding of approximately $18 million from the Quebec government, and also there's funding from other partners, and we anticipate leveraging even more funding. So this is the federal portion over 7 years. So I'm going to start by, the program for this morning is I will start by introducing the project, giving a bit of an overview, and Alan Evans, the scientific director, who's with me. The associate scientific director is Doina Pracup. She's also here, as are most of our research theme leaders in the project. I will give a brief overview, and Alan will talk about the scientific goals, the priorities, themes, and perhaps most importantly, the funding opportunities. I'm going to go through my few slides. Alan will then give his overview of the scientific program, and we won't open for questions until we're done, because we want to be able to have a lot of the time for questions with our research theme and other research leaders at the front, so they can, you can ask questions of them specifically as well. So with that, I want to get started. I do want to mention that there's an overflow room. I don't think there's anyone in it yet, and we are live web streaming, so we will, those of you who are listening hopefully on the web can hear me, and you can send questions. You can ask questions here, the people here. The people at home or at their office, wherever they are, can send us questions at hbhl@mcgill.ca. The address will be on the last slide as well. So that's our HBHL address, hbhl@mcgill.ca, so that we can, so people don't have to be here on this cold morning, and you can ask questions. So with that, I'll start with our vision and goals. And the main goal of HBHL is to achieve an understanding of the individual brain and mental health determinants that would facilitate the development of so-called targeted, personalized treatment options in areas of brain health and mental health. Our vision, which is ambitious, is that within 10 years, we will transform many brain disorders from terminal or lifelong afflictions to treatable, even curable conditions. Ultimately, our goal is to reduce the human and socioeconomic burden of psychiatric and neurologic illnesses, improve mental health, quality of life, and productivity of Canadians and people around the world for generations to come. So we have big goals, but I think you'll agree that we're up to it. I want to emphasize, really underline, that our vision includes improving clinical but also the social outcomes. So, and the next slide is the high-level overall 7-year budget plan. As I mentioned, there's $84 million from the federal government, CFREF. There's also $18 million from Quebec. You may not have heard about that because it's not publicly announced by the Quebec government yet. It will be, we think, soon. They want to make their own big announcement. You'll see the breakdown here, and as it should be, I think, and expected, most of the funding, over approximately $75 million of the total, is going to the direct cost of research, and we'll explain later how that is meant to roll out. A small amount, relatively speaking, and this is all over 7 years, for HBHL administration, which includes the research management, business development, support for innovation, communications, and all the support that the HBHL project will need, and then the usual roughly 20% for indirect costs. I also want to highlight how our CFREF project, Healthy Brains for Healthy Lives, interacts. We have many partners, but we do interact with two university academic partners who are of the greatest importance in this collaboration. First, I want to, and Alan will elaborate on this, that although it's broadly speaking a project on neuroscience and mental health, there is a strong focus on neuroinformatics and computational data science in that is the basis for Healthy Brains for Healthy Lives initiative. Having said that, we are linked very strongly to the BrainsCan initiative at Western. This is another CFREF project, again funded by the federal government to the tune of $66 million. And I like to point out, because this is how the CFREF and federal government looked at it, that they looked at 66 plus 84 in this competition as a $150 million. That's why it adds up to that even number, as a $150 million investment in neuroscience research in Canada. And it was part of our proposal and also part of the funding award to work very closely with Western on their CFREF project to ensure that this is aligned and synergistic and that Canada could get more for their investment than one or other part. So we are very much working with Western. We have a collaboration agreement with them, and it's fair to say that collaboration with Western is mainly around brain imaging technology and cognitive neuroscience. And for those of you familiar with Western, these are, of course, their major areas of strength in the area. The other area, which was less mandated by the CFREF and the investment in neuroscience, but is related to another Apogee or CFREF project, is the one awarded to University of Montreal, which was really on artificial intelligence machine learning. Their project is not specifically focused on neuroscience. On the contrary, they worked with us and we worked with them to have them recognize and work with McGill in the area where there's intersection between their work on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and ours on neuroscience. So they received $93 million from CFREF for the machine learning artificial intelligence project, and we're very excited to work with them, especially simply across the mountain in the same city, to build this area related to neuroscience. So that'll be a very strong collaboration as well. And together, these, I should mention that you see CFAR, Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, who are associated with, especially the collaboration with Western, in assisting us, providing some funding and programs to encourage and facilitate that collaboration. That's one of our partners. The other thing I should mention is, and Alan can speak to this more, is that together we're looking at establishing a pan-Canadian network for brain research that involves, initially at least, these two partners, especially Western. So Alan will speak to that shortly. So these are the implementation milestones, some of which is, as you can see in the not so distant past, by the end of last year, we have largely established the governance that I'll show you. We're working currently on signing the funding agreement with the federal government. This is a little bit of a technicality for you, but the money doesn't flow until we do that, so it is important, and we're about to finalize that agreement now. Currently this winter, so now we are working on the HBHL funding envelopes and the program development, and importantly the fund distribution. We needed the governance in place to be able to actually do that. We're working on thematic workshops for the 4 research themes, and you'll hear more about that later. And we're establishing a small HBHL administrative office with the hiring of a managing director actually anticipated in the next few weeks, that announcement, or month, something like that. So this slide here is the governance, and I may have to point, but hopefully you can see this. It starts with I am going to focus on the top of the organogram for a few minutes, and Alan will talk more about the research themes and introduce the leaders. I really want to emphasize that the board at the top and the Research Management Committee, chaired by Alan Evans, is here, and those have been established. Anne McKinney, who's in the room, is the vice chair of this committee as well, and it's a very important one. The theme leaders have all been appointed. RMC has met and is meeting monthly to get the project moving, and we also have appointed the International Advisory Council, 6 to 8 members of international experts, and the Partnership and Innovation Council in the right top corner is also moving forward, and we expect that to be formally established by springtime. Partnerships and innovation is a very big part of the proposal, although we probably won't have a chance to really talk about that too much today. But I know that there's already action and movement in this area. I'll invite you to look at, there's an innovation fellowship launched by the ABP for Innovation and Partnerships, and she was meant to be here, but maybe she'll be here later to answer any questions on that. But there are 2 innovation partnerships, for example, for newly graduated graduate students or postdocs to get involved in innovation and neuroscience. That's just a very small piece of some of the programs that we are looking to establish. So a brief word on the key governance bodies. The board has mainly oversight and accountability. The Research Management Committee, again in place, is in charge of scientific oversight of programming and the deliverables, peer review process, and the allocation of funds. I've already mentioned the International Advisory Council. Its role will be to advise and to ensure that HPHL the research is maintained at the highest international standard. And the Partnership and Innovation Council I already talked about earlier. Some of the details on the board: you have the mandate on the left at a high level, and the membership on the right. And the board officially met for the first time in December, and we'll meet again in March. We're meeting on a quarterly basis. I chair that board, and you can see that we also have a representative, the VP Research, my contemporary from Western, and we also sit on their board. This is one of the manifestations of the close collaboration. Importantly, we are still recruiting 2 to 4 members at large who will be from external to McGill, people with expertise in it who can assist us with innovation or public. These are the broad categories: innovation, the private sector, industry, healthcare, patients, end users, and public policy. We haven't settled on, those are the areas where we want to fill in the expertise of the board. So I'm almost done, and for scientific oversight and leadership, we have the smiling faces of Alan Evans, who will be speaking soon, and Dwayne DePraycup, who's the Associate Scientific Director, and they will be in charge of planning research activities, implementing the research programs, and basically the delivery of the HPHL mandate. So, with that, I do have the website. I should have mentioned at the beginning that the proposal itself, where all this started, is posted, and the summaries and the research themes, much of what we're talking about today is posted on the HPHL website, and we're continually improving that and adding to it. And also the address for questions, hphl@mcgill.ca. That's our address also for questions after today as well, during the webcast, but also if you have questions and you're not sure who to direct them to, this is an email that is monitored always, and you will be answered if you have any question or directed to the right person. And before I introduce Alan Evans, who probably needs no introduction, he asked me to, he told me that this is the first, this is sort of a test, right? This is a social science experiment. I'm not a social scientist, so forgive me. But what do you see here? We ask you, do you see a brain? Do you see a map? And, you know, what do you see there? And then Alan will take over. I think the message for this slide is that Montreal is the center of the brain, or brain research. And Alan is going to tell you how we're going to make that, how that is, and how we're going to make it happen even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. It's an honor and a privilege to be the scientific director of this program. On the other hand, I often feel like I'm strapped to the front of a train that everybody else is driving. I think that's probably a good thing. So I'll start by just giving a brief overview of the organogram. I've been told not to use. There we go. There we go now. So you see that we have 4 themes, and I'll go into those in more detail. Those are silos where we have specific domain applications of a general principle. But more importantly, we have 5 cross-cutting themes in social science, IT and machine learning, clinical knowledge translation, animal models, and cellular tissue mechanisms. So these are binding aspects of the whole project, which we hope will impose a unified approach to studies of the normal brain development and diseases thereof. The HPL subcommittees that I just described, these are the leaders of the group, and they're all represented here. So that's any questions that you will have on the details here, you can go into in great detail and ask them all the difficult questions. The Research Management Committee is the place where all of the major scientific decisions will be made for this project. And it has a good representation of people across the university, different institutions, different domains. And it will be a very, I think, energetic and active environment to discuss how to move this program forward. It's worth pointing out that we also have representation from the University of Montreal, Julien Doyon, who's here in the room, and Ravi Menon from Western University. His background is in MRI imaging, and Julien's background is in cognitive neuroscience. So again, we have a good representation of different brain-related disciplines. The overall goals of the program, of what I call Hubble, some people say HBHL, but I spit my false teeth out when I say that, so I prefer to say Hubble. The overall goal is to understand the individual brain. To do that by integrating information from many different data domains, genetics, epigenetics, imaging, behavioral, environmental, clinical, and importantly, social metrics. NeuroHub I will talk about later, but this is the IT core and the analytic modeling component of the overall program. And importantly, we want to bridge the gap between basic research and its clinical implementation. So we want to come up with best practices, guidelines, support for the clinical translation of our brain research across that valley of death between basic research and clinical application. The basic premise of the whole program is illustrated here. We have this core informatics and modeling silo, theme that I'm leading, and then we have three major domains. Guy Rouleau is in the room, is leading the silo on models of neurodegenerative diseases. Robert Sartori over there is leading the cognitive neuroscience of brain plasticity, and Michael Meany is leading the population neuroscience and brain health, in association with all of those cross-cutting themes that I've mentioned. Very quick Cook's tour of the individual models. The basic premise here is that we're trying to move away from clinical descriptors. On the left, you can see the typical situation where multiple genes or gene clusters will be associated with multiple different clinical disorders. This is a mess. If we want to try and deconstruct the situation into something which is actionable, we need to operate on the right-hand side, where those specific gene or gene clusters associated with specific brain mechanisms, be those cellular or molecular or at the systems level. Once we can identify an aberrant mechanism, then we potentially can design a targeted intervention to that mechanism. In due course, sorting out the mechanisms will help us address the clinical presentation of the disease. Of course, animal models are a powerful way to decipher those mechanisms and circuits. So the animal models led by Brigitte Kiefer will be an important component of the project. The theme 2, mechanistic models of neurodegenerative disease, led by Guy Rouleau. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but one example of what I just described is shown here, where we have taken from the public domain large numbers of PET images of the distribution of the toxic protein beta amyloid, which is thought to be implicated in Alzheimer's disease. By large-scale computational modeling using this public data and big data computing, we've able to extract from this large cohort this following basic result. If you look at the top left, what you see here is that if you go from healthy controls to early mild cognitive impairment, late cognitive impairment, and frank Alzheimer's disease, there's not much difference in the production parameter, in the mechanism for producing amyloid in brain. On the other hand, we see on the top right that there is a strong dependence on the clearance of that toxic protein. So if you're designing a drug to interfere with the Alzheimer's disease process, there's not a lot of point in looking at the synthesis pathway. You're better off to look at the clearance pathway. So that's a simple, clean demonstration of why it's important to look at circuits and pathways, not the disease overall. En passant, you can notice that also when we look at the association of these two production and clearance parameters to the status of the ApoE4 gene allele, which is the highest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, you see that the production parameter doesn't depend much on the allele status, whether you have one or two alleles, but the clearance term does. So that's one worked example of a general principle. We can apply this principle in many neurodegenerative disorders. Indeed, we can apply it in neurodevelopmental disorders and brain plasticity. Guy Rouleau is also leading the MNI Open Science Drug Discovery Program. This is a major component of this theme. And it's allowing McGill a sandbox, if you will, to explore a very novel concept of open science. Basically, the problem that we face here is that basic mechanisms of brain disease are complex and they're poorly understood. We often don't have access to tissue to try and understand the basic cellular mechanisms that have given rise to a brain disease. Therefore, it's not clear what new drugs what the new drugs should target, and this leads to widespread scattershot testing and high failure rate. So the closed proprietary approach adopted in pharmaceutical industries, they create redundancy, and many test centers are testing the same component. Instead, if you bring everybody together, the pharmaceutical industries, to share their pre-competitive information, everybody wins. Now, you may think that that is rather a quixotic, naive perspective. The MNI's Neuro Open Science project is really the neurological manifestation of what has been going on with the Structural Genome Consortium, led originally in Toronto, for about a decade now, where they've raised over $400 million from pharmaceutical companies to move this idea forward. So what we are doing is simply building upon that basic principle. This will allow the solution to these problems within the Open Science program is to work with human tissue and neurons to generate stem cells. So those of you who are not in neuroscience, basically we're taking cells which are from the patients, turning them into induced pluripotent stem cells, which basically are putting them back into the embryonic phase. We can then do gene editing to either introduce disease-associated mutations or to indeed correct those disease-associated mutations. So in specific neuronal populations, we can explore diseases in a very targeted and mechanistic way. Of course, this will lead to successful interventions, which can then be put back into patient trials that will ultimately benefit the patients. The third theme is applied cognitive neuroscience of brain plasticity, and this is led by Robert Sartori. And this is a busy slide, but the basic point here is that we can see plastic changes in brain structure and brain function as a consequence of some sort of behavioral intervention. And on the top left here, you can see one of my favorite examples. This is the juggling study. They took people who had never juggled. They did brain scans on these people. 3 months later, after the training, they scanned them again, and they saw very specific changes in the visuospatial areas of brain in response to that learned training. Then they stopped them from touching the juggling equipment, redid the analysis, and lo and behold, the brain reverted back to its original state. So this is a temporal changes in brain structure in response to some learning paradigm. And of course, you can do that same thing in many other settings, whether it's skill learning in Tetris or musicianship, something which Robert leads the world in. Taxi drivers in London also have shown changes in hippocampus as a result of learning the knowledge of how to drive around London. So these are general principles which can be used to understand how the brain changes and is optimized according to some training intervention. Fourth theme is the population neuroscience and brain health, led by Michael Meany, and certainly involves the social science dimension led by Lawrence Kirrmaier. And we'll be setting up very soon a workshop to capture context, refining the science of mind, brain, and culture by including the social environment. We all know that our children watch too much TV, they watch too much Facebook. This affects their brains. Sometimes they have the attention span of a fruit fly. What does that actually mean in terms of their brain organization? We've never been able to capture and operationalize that information, but it is of profound importance to brain development and optimizing brain health for a knowledge-based economy. We also want to look at the effects of migration and urban environments on mental health, look at the mediators of mental health effects of microaggression and discrimination, and the interaction of social, developmental, and neurobiological determinants of suicide, depression, dysphoria among Indigenous youth. Lawrence has just established the Multicultural Mental Health Resource Center to allow people from different cultural backgrounds to get support for mental health issues And this kind of information will be incorporated into our broad assault on mental health and mental illness. Animal models from Brigitte Kiefer's world. Here, this slide is simply to stress the importance of testing out specific mechanisms in animal models. And these animal models, which will allow us to combine genes and molecular pathways and brain circuitry at the systems level and phenotypical behavioral information, all combined within this comprehensive neuroinformatics framework. These will obviously have applications in all of the main neurobiological themes 2, 3, and 4, with an emphasis on cognition. All of the information that is collected, be it invasive, such as derived from optogenetics or calcium imaging, or non-invasive behavioral phenotyping, all of this information will be incorporated into our data infrastructure, which I will now come on and describe. Once we have got all this information, we will be able to extract useful knowledge from all of that information. So we come to NeuroHub, the IT analytic core of the enterprise. We're by no means finished with this enterprise. It's been in existence for the last decade in one form or another, but there's an awful lot of work to be done to expand it and operationalize it to a very large McGill community, a Montreal community, and national and international communities. Two of the components of NeuroHub are described here. One is CBrain, which is essentially a portal that allows neuroscientists who don't know or care about the fine structure, the details of getting access to big computing, can get access to the national high-performance computing grid of the country through this portal called CBrain, which was developed here at McGill. Another component of this is the LORIS databasing infrastructure, which allows us to combine imaging, behavior, genetics, epigenetics, tissue samples of the kind I described for the Open Science Project. All of that information under one roof allows us to explore data in very novel ways, which has been hitherto very difficult to do because these data domains are often very separate and don't combine the data in a meaningful way. Our NeuroHub will allow us to get access to all of that information. The international community, we have over 500 users of this NeuroHub environment already in different formats. And of course, we propose to expand this with our partners, IBM, EMC, CGI, other corporate partners will be joining us in expanding this international outreach. Just one example of this to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that we're working on is the so-called CCC axis. This is a linkage between China, Canada, and Cuba. Researchers all taking advantage of CBrain and LORIS to share very large cohorts. When we talk about 1,000 subjects being a large cohort, in China, that number is 100,000. The potential of extracting information from the Chinese partners and combining it in novel analytic ways using the machinery that we have at McGill and in Canada is truly exciting. The Cuban dimension is not a third wheel. They probably have done more than any country in the world to translate basic research into the clinic. They have a lot to teach us. To close, you may have heard of the Human Brain Project in Europe. This is a 1.2 billion euro project that involves 200 scientists in many countries. This is essentially a computational simulation problem to try and model the human brain ultimately at the individual neuronal level, very much a grand challenge. That's what they are doing in Europe. In the US, they launched the BRAIN Initiative, which is essentially a US response to the Human Brain Project, and this is more about neurotechnology development. What can Canada do? We think that Canada has a particular strength in translational neuroscience, clinical translational research. We think that Canada is large enough to have a global impact, but it's small enough to be organizable on a national scale. And we have many examples of this already in place, and we're building on top of those examples within the context of Hubble. We have a mature national informatics infrastructure. In a classically Canadian way, the goal here will be to potentiate, not to dictate. It's not going to be top-down, it's going to be bottom-up, and different thematic subgroups will self-organize across the country using our infrastructure. We'll foster open, collaborative projects at different levels and spatial scales. And importantly, we will foster cross-disciplinary training and career paths. Now, the stuff that you really came here to find out about. Where's this money going? The important thing to mention here in this distribution of the $65–70 million that Rosie mentioned is that it's almost all peer-reviewed. That's not quite the case for technology development and core operations, but all of the scientific sub-components of this funding will be reviewed by international colleagues who have been collected as a college of reviewers by the Research Management Committee. We have a discovery fund for major themes on the order of about $1 million a year. Typically we'll fund about 3 programs each about $300,000. Research Transition Awards, which will allow people who are moving from one field into another to get some support for that transition. Innovative ideas, crazy ideas that won't be funded by traditional funding mechanisms, but high risk, high reward applications. International collaborative platform integration is an important part of the vision I've outlined. We have a partnership with the Quebec government to foster ideas that have commercial potential. We have knowledge mobilization, which is to take the basic research information and move it into a clinical outreach and clinical application. Talent training. We're going to have 20 studentships, postdoctoral fellowships, new investigator startups. There will be something like 21 new faculty associated with this program. The salary, this is a McGill commitment to this program. The startup grants of those people will be paid for from the Hubble budget. And visiting fellows, scientists who want to come to McGill for some period of time to learn about what we're doing, or vice versa. And the infrastructure I've mentioned. One more time, we can go through this in finer detail. The Discovery Fund is what many of you will be most concerned about. About $300,000–400,000 a year for 2 to 4 awards per year over the 7 years of the program. The innovative ideas, exploration of novel and innovative ideas with the potential for breakthrough science. Seed grants of about $25,000 for 1 year. More developed applications of vision, $100,000 for every 2 years, and about 5 per year overall. The graduate students, about 20, and 10 postdoctoral fellows. New investigator startups I've mentioned. Visiting fellows I've mentioned, about $50,000 per year for 4 years. The International Collaborative Platform Fund, $500,000 per year total. The New Innovation Fund matched by the Quebec government. And the Knowledge Mobilization, Research and Innovation Chairs, Knowledge Translation for policy, products, or processes. About $100,000 a year, 6 awards per year. The infrastructural support, this is not really peer-reviewed. You have to have the basic core platforms to make all of this work. The operation, the technology development will be peer-reviewed. The core facilities operation will be identified by the RMC. When is all this going to take place? The tissue development workshops that theme development workshops we've already discussed, those have already been put in place, and we expect to see these taking place over the next few months. The international collaboration is already underway. We've established a linkage with the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility, which is a global clearinghouse of the kinds of activities that I've just described, which will allow us to take our place on the international scene. The core platforms that I've just discussed. Visiting fellows, innovative ideas, and technology development, we will have those calls put out in the spring, as similarly for student scholarships and fellowships, and the Neuro Innovation Fund. It'll take a little bit longer to implement the knowledge mobilization and the interdisciplinary discovery research teams because these are bigger programs. They require more reviewing. And so that will take a little while, but we expect to see money flowing from these programs towards the late fall, September, October, November period. So with that, I think that's an overview of the scientific directions that we're going in, and I think Rosie and I and the rest of the team are ready to take questions. We'll be moderated by Doina Prekup, the Associate Scientific Director of Hubble. Doina.
So for the question period, I'd like to invite the theme leaders and committee leaders to come and sit at the front here. Because this is being recorded, there's actually 2 microphones. So if you have a question, put your hand up. You'll receive a microphone, and please speak in the microphone so that the recording is going to be clear. And I also have 3 microphones here to circulate to the panel. You can come over here. Yeah, so any questions? Peter? It's okay, it's not gonna hear on the PA, it's only for the recording. It's okay.
Perfect. It's fantastic. So I have a quick question. The slide that you mentioned, Alan, that we were all waiting for, the budget. So roughly added up to $60 million. Where's the other $20 million?
64.8.
Alan, you have to speak in the microphone.
It's 64.8.
But total is 83 or 84. No? So where's the other 20?
Indirect costs and administration. This was in the slide that Rosie showed at the beginning.
Oh, okay. Wow. Thanks.
I guess I'm still processing all the different sort of funding mechanisms that will ultimately really be there, as you've shown on the table. But in general, like for the larger innovative, for the larger interdisciplinary discovery, or then these smaller seed innovative mechanisms, do you have any overall framework for like the number of PIs that you envision for these different mechanisms? Are all of them potentially multi-PI? Are they all potentially a single PI, and it really just depends on the vision?
There's no particular rule about that. The criteria will be first of all excellence and relevance to the basic goals of the program. I think it's important to stress that this is not a meta-funding agency. This is a targeted research initiative with specific goals that it has to achieve. So relevance to those overall goals that Rosie initially described is an important criterion. But the number of PIs is not something that we're trying to constrain.
So just to add a little bit to that, the larger theme grants, the collaborative research is envisioned as a team grant, but there is no specific, target number of PIs. It's whatever makes sense in the context of that project. Yes.
So you mentioned you described the CFREF portion of funding and how it broken down to the different themes, but you didn't mention how the funding from the Quebec government or your other partners will be dispersed in this overall vision. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question since there was no microphone. How will the funding from Quebec and other partners be broken down?
So Alan's moving that to me. With the other partners, there are many, and it would be too complicated to, I could answer specific questions, and maybe in time. With many of our partners, we haven't actually worked that out yet. However, with Quebec, they have given us a framework, and their funding will go mainly towards the innovation aspects of the proposal, and business development. When you saw there was a few $1 million for administration under Quebec, that's really business development. They've specified that they want the hiring of staff to assist with commercialization and knowledge translation. That'll be mainly. There will be funds for international and studentships, so they've given us a framework, but we haven't actually put it all in place yet.
Yes.
So I'm not sure exactly who this question is for. I'm Christina Wolfson. I'm a neuroepidemiologist. As many of you know, there are a number of infrastructures across Canada emerging and already in place that relate to brain health and population health in particular. I can obviously, Alan and the others know about the CCNA, but there's also the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, which is a national study of 50,000 people. So I'd like to encourage, if not already done, to open doors of collaboration to build upon some things that are already there that may help things go a little bit faster in some domains.
I think it's, thanks, Tina. Ed, I should point out that, for instance, we right now have a grant in dissemination with Brain Canada, which is going to allow us to develop open science initiatives in a pan-Canadian manner to share data in an open manner. CCNA will be providing information into that same infrastructure, obviously with some level of embargo for the participating scientists for a limited period of time. But in due course, that data will be made open on a national scale. I would love to see CLSA do something similar.
Talk to me.
Yes, let's talk.
And I think Tina's being modest because many of these initiatives are led at McGill. So we are in a very good position to do so.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to ask about support to core facilities and specifically brain imaging. It's, as you know very well, Alan, it's a strength at McGill with the Douglas and our friends at the RI and the MNI. And I guess my short question would be, have you identified yet the core facilities who may be eligible to support?
Yes, the Brain Imaging Center is certainly one of the components which is eligible. At this point, we haven't got to the point of defining what funds go to what cores. That's still in discussion, but certainly the BIC is an element in that.
And I think it's important to add that it will not be simply predetermined and decided. There will be eligible, platforms will be able to, will have an opportunity to pitch their eligibility. And then the decisions will be made by the RMC.
Yes, I'm here.
So I have a question about the specificity of the themes. The themes that were mentioned here is neuroinformatics, cognitive, animal models, etc., etc. And I think that also in terms of specialization of the panel here, they are aligned to that. And how about themes that go across these themes, or questions that go across these themes, that, say, fall under animal models, but not the kind of animal models of disease, fall under neuroinformatics, but not neuroinformatics of large data, and fall under cognitive neuroscience, but not human imaging, but animal imaging, or animal neurophysiology. Are these eligible questions, and who's going to manage them?
They're certainly eligible, and they will be reviewed within the orbit of the Research Management Committee and its College of International Reviewers. So there are no hard and fast rules here to either include or exclude directed research of the kind you described.
Yeah, and
Yeah, sorry. Just I think the kind of what you're suggesting is actually encouraged. So, for example, you could easily imagine projects that cut across brain health, population neuroscience, and cognitive neuroscience. Doing brain imaging on psychotherapy, for example, would be one example. Animal models cut across the social dimension. We could think of how socioeconomic status is reflected within forces that can be easily modeled not only in the animal models, but even in cell mechanisms. So in fact, cutting across, I think, is something that's actually encouraged. The organizational structure is not at all meant to be limiting. It's meant to provide specific objectives and relevance, but the targeting is in fact assuming that there will be innovation and things that really weren't preconceived as structural elements. So what you're suggesting in terms of bringing together multiple, either cross-cutting platforms or in terms of individual themes, is something that I think is encouraged.
Thanks for the encouragement. I just want to ask another thing, and this is that, well, I'll ask about my questions.
Is
right?
this an easy question? Because if it is, I'll take it. If not, I'll throw it down.
It's probably easy. So thanks for the encouragement. I would like to focus on things that I have in my mind, and this is not necessary because in your response you mentioned disease, etc., etc. I'm talking about tools that can support imaging of disease, that can help interpret imaging, etc., etc. Are these eligible? Although I'm not going to have
Absolutely.
any questions related to one specific disease.
No, this is not disease-oriented. We expressly use the term brain health. So it is not, it is cutting across the spectrum. And I think as Rosie mentioned in the opening comments, it is not only disease, but in fact essentially directed towards productivity, healthy brain, and enhancement of healthy brains. So it's by no means, and is exactly what you're suggesting, tools, for example, innovation that would meet these particular goals. I think it's as Alan said, there's a set of particular objectives. There are multiple ways of achieving those particular objectives.
Yes.
And projects which are binding together more than one of these themes are very much to be encouraged.
Yes. Can you pass the microphone, please?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if you could speak more to the healthy lives part of the equation. As someone in the humanities, that's a very interesting facet for me. And for example, there's tremendous amount of data out there now on how people express themselves, express their emotions online, and so forth. Are there ways in which you're thinking about bringing that dimension of people's expressive capacity or creative capacity into the healthy brains, healthy lives equation?
Yeah, the microphone's handed to me. I'm the proxy for this, the 90% of what this ought to be about, which is absolutely about, because we're not really brains, we're people, and we live in social worlds, and the brain itself is kind of the organ of sociality and culture and so on. So the idea is to try to build that in a very systematic way, both in as many projects as possible, but also to develop whatever tools and conceptual models and specific projects can advance that. And that means looking at population health. It means looking at ways of incorporating real-world contexts into the research that's going on and building bridges between those. And we've been involved in trying to plan some initial workshops on that, but I don't kill myself with the microphone.
Yeah, well, at least not verbally, anyway. I think the other thing you want to keep in mind is you say, are we thinking about this? The innovation is out there, right? This is a framework that's meant to support that level of innovation that comes from the McGill and allied communities. I think the second comment is there is one component of particularly Theme 4, which is try to better bring neuroscience into disadvantaged, underserved communities, which, by the way, refers to almost the entire population. So the workplace, for example, if you look within industry, the level of evidence-based programs that associate with mental health and productivity are virtually zero. There's a huge role for neuroscience to play within the workplace, within schools, within indigenous communities, within refugee and migrant communities, etc. Now, that need not be modeled uniquely in human populations. There are a lot of ways of being able to address those particular issues. But I think the innovation, that's a target. How that's addressed and the innovation is really something we look for to support the community.
I just wanted to add that we'll be organizing workshops to bring people together to brainstorm how to build these bridges, and hopefully out of that will come collaborations that can incorporate exactly the kind of research you're alluding to.
There's a question in front. If you could pass the microphone, please.
So I guess these series of last questions kind of, the way that the project is presented is very mechanistic, prevention, cure-oriented, yet Healthy Lives is a very different approach. And so I guess when you're pitching the different requests for application, it would be important to pitch this broader view of what would be eligible, because it doesn't come through in the presentation. So for example, service delivery models, would that fit? Interventions in the real world, as opposed to experimental approaches. The scope of brain-based diseases, like do children beyond mental health, would this be a population of interest? So I think those aspects haven't been coming through, and the outcomes that are more about healthy lives haven't been coming through in the presentation. So I think it would be important to consider.
If I may just thank you for the comment and suggestion, and it reminds me to say that this is the first time that the CFREF program is new. And it's the largest grant McGill's ever received from the one large grant from the federal government. So some of it we are learning as we go along, and we will take feedback on our calls for proposals and on how we roll things out, and as we go along. So, and we will make changes in the program. It is not cast in stone as well. If we do inevitably not get the kinds of projects we foresaw that we should get, we will rescope and revise. But we do welcome feedback on the plans, especially as we roll them out. I guess I want to emphasize too about the workshops, because Lawrence mentioned a workshop. All of the themes are now proposing and organizing workshops to flesh out these themes and encourage collaboration across McGill currently.
Just add one small thing, that another aspect of the social science subcommittee, the sort of cross-cutting theme, is looking at the social implications of this research. So some of the larger questions about policy impact, about how questions are being framed that we sort of need a self-reflective process on, what will, I think, be a legitimate aspect of the larger research program.
Question in the back.
So this is a question which is a follow-up to a question that was asked earlier. That is a little bit more specific. You gave us a brief description of neuroinformatics, the theme of neuroinformatics. Does that include also, the classical methods of computational neuroscience and, links, mechanism, and activity, etc.? So.
Yeah, so it's a very broad theme, and yes, it does include sort of traditional computational neuroscience as well as more data-intensive approaches. And the idea is that this platform that we build should accommodate both modeling as well as data sets that are coming from all of these perspectives. So it's not just machine learning, it also includes sort of traditional computational neuroscience, it also includes classical statistical methods as well, and we aim to have all of that integrated. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So I want to follow up maybe a bit on Amir's question too about technology development. So we saw there was a big chunk for like computational technology development. Is there also funding for tools development with biological interaction? I saw there was neuroscience or stem cells in a dish, which I think there's actually that's a bioengineering field maybe that could be developed there. Or also for biomarkers. I think there could be also proteins that could be used as biomarkers. So, but where technologies might need to be developed as well. So are these kind of areas, will they also be considered? Can you maybe comment on that?
Yes, so I think, absolutely. I think that the idea, if you remember, there are subcommittees, and one of them are for cell and tissue modeling, which I'm heading, and that subcommittee actually, the idea is exactly that, is to bring in across the four themes, different approaches. So, we've been doing cell culture for many, many decades, but to now try to, use new materials, new approaches, and as well as things like computer vision and machine learning to try to analyze, the cells and the tissues in the dish. I think that's the idea, and that would be something that we would hope would be encouraged, and we'd get put together groups of people that are very, very cross-disciplinary.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jeanine, and I'm from the chemistry department. And I was looking at your idea of doing cross-disciplinary training for students, And I think although all of us have great ideas as professors, I think a lot of the innovation is going to come from our students. So I'm wondering if you could explain how you're going to foster this interdisciplinary between students. And let's say we apply and we're like lucky enough that one of our students that's not typically in the neuroscience field gets selected. How are they going to be integrated within this system?
So, I think you're absolutely right that the student component is going to be really important. So we have funding for these fellowships. And the idea of these fellowships is also that students who are working in one field but would like to sort of transition towards an application area that is related to the theme of HBHL would have an opportunity to have some funding to go in a different lab perhaps, or to work in co-supervision with somebody else in order to sort of develop that side of their research. And so the student fellowship applications will not be very sort of narrowly focused necessarily. They will be, always we keep in mind excellence and we keep in mind fit with HPHL, but certainly collaborative research, cross-disciplinary research would be very much encouraged. And we do envision that students from computer science, from basic science disciplines, physics, chemistry, and so on, who have an interest in neuroscience, this will be a great opportunity for them to cross that bridge. Guillaume and then John.
So maybe this is a question for Guy, but you talked a bit about the Open Science Initiative, and I was curious to know what the links were going to be between that initiative and this program, and if you could explain on that a bit.
It's that, in fact, when the application was being put together, it was thought that that we wanted to frame it in something which is more the future than the past, and that's how open science became kind of integrated into the application. Even though, you can imagine this, there's also a pressure for commercialization and open science. So they fit together well, but sometimes hard for people to understand how they fit together. And there are some projects, like for example, the neurodegeneration project, which is very much anchored in open science. The whole of the neuroinformatics really is to harbor open data, and so it's integrated in it. It's not everything is open science in the project, but that's kind of how it came to be.
I would like to add to that we're also envisioning open software going with this open initiative, so not just the data, but also the pipelines for processing the data. To the extent that it's possible, we would like to make them open source and available.
I think we have to make sure that people understand that while some of us are believers in the concepts of open science, this is not mandatory across the Hubble project. It is something which is rooted at the MNI under Guy's leadership, and there are lots of initiatives related to open science. But if somebody wants to do their own work, patent it, they're perfectly at liberty to do that under the auspices of Hubble.
And I wanted to add the research component of it is, as Alan had mentioned, it's kind of a sandbox at the MNI. As part of this proposal, we also are looking at evaluating the outcomes of open science as it relates to this project. And we'll be working with OECD in that area to really provide some data as to how this works. So that'll be part of the study.
I found, Rosie and Alan, your presentations clear and helpful in seeing how the goals and themes would inform the slide where you had about where the money will go. But you mentioned in passing that the university is also committed to hiring 21 new people, and that wasn't clear at all to me how that is going to work.
It's a moving target, and yes, a lot of people are obviously interested. I think it's sufficient to say at this point that the university is committed to bringing people in who are transdisciplinary in nature, who are going to do science at the interface between traditional departments. That's the creativity and innovation of the Hubble Initiative.
I think the question may have been related to funding, though. Who's going to, if I could be really concrete, who's going to fund the 21 positions? You didn't see it in the table. Is that really what you're?
Well, it's both.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
The decision
Yes,
making
yeah.
too, and
Yeah.
are there going to
Yeah.
be 4 deans
Yeah.
duking it out, or?
Yeah, this
I
is
think-
not for public discussion, probably. But Alan did allude to this, that this is the McGill commitment. So 21 faculty members are not, you don't see lines of funds that would be millions of dollars over 7 years. This is the McGill commitment to hire in this area. Only the startup packages are committed from these funds, and also we anticipate these faculty will apply for other funding under this program, and of course that helps to recruit excellent faculty from around the world. How is the decision-making process is still being reviewed and decided upon in conjunction with the provost and the principal, but this will also be open and transparent. It will become very clear shortly on how that will happen. And because it's interdisciplinary, there will be challenges, and yes, we will talk to multiple deans and many department chairs, but we hope to do it in a collaborative, productive fashion.
The notion of this grant really is to see where we think the field is going to go. and so it's really to go somewhere where we aren't right now. And there are a lot of talent or a lot of expertise which we don't have or we need more of. And so the lasting effect of this grant, if you wish, will be the hiring of people to populate with others at McGill the whole field. And that's kind of the lasting effect. So the hiring is very important.
Yes?
So it was mentioned that this project is, to a certain extent, in collaboration with Western University and University of Montreal, but nothing was mentioned in terms of how is that going in practice to take place. For example, grants that include collaborators from these universities. Is it, is it eligible? Are they going to be the collaborators? Are they going to be funded from their funds or from McGill funds? Are we encouraged to collaborate, etc.?
Maybe I can respond to that, because I'm the liaison between McGill and Western from the McGill side, and Ravi Menon is the counterpart. And in fact, as Rosie mentioned, when these grants are going forward, the agency strongly encouraged, shall we say, the two universities to work together to have a plan for collaboration rather than for competition. And so, in fact, one of the deliverables, if I'm not mistaken, that we have to demonstrate is how we've implemented that plan, and therefore any projects that will be funded, to the extent that they have a collaborative component between Western and McGill, will be strongly encouraged, because that's one of the things we have to demonstrate that this is actually going forward. In addition to the collaborative research, there will also be opportunities that have yet to be worked out in detail with Western for student and postdoc exchanges, for example. Exactly what form that will take is up in the air at the moment, but that's also one of the goals.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a little bit to that in terms of the collaboration with Université de Montréal. People from here were sitting on their scientific leadership board, and they will participate here. But also the idea is that there will be sort of team proposals, perhaps including people from there, and that we will also participate in team proposals over there. That is very much a methodology-focused grant. And so it's very complementary in some sense to what is going to be done here. This will be the kind of data that they would really like to use to apply their methods on. And so that's the kind of integration we envision. There is also some of the discussions we're having with the industrial partners, with EMC and IBM and so on, are involving these other collaborations as well, especially the collaboration with Western. And so whatever agreements crystallize in the end will likely be sort of unified at the level of both universities there.
And I should say all this is true, and the exact mechanism of collaboration is still being worked out, who can apply for which grants, but definitely these partners are eligible to be part of our teams, and we will be eligible to be part of their teams. Exactly how that will work will also be reciprocal, right? Whatever we do, the other universities will do in turn for our faculty. Joint courses have been talked about. There's many areas of collaboration that we have yet to explore more fully.
I'm wondering if there are any questions from online. I don't see Brett here. Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lila Mirali. I'm the chief of child psychiatry here, and I'm very interested in what you mentioned about collaboration, especially because I'm wondering if this big grant allows for evaluation of organization of services based on research outcomes and studying the outcomes of organization of services for young population, like children, adolescents. Within, in collaboration within faculty, for example, with the Faculty of Management at McGill, and with the Department of, Child Psychiatry at Université de Montréal.
Leslie.
Just to speak about the kind of, in a way, the clinical outreach or the clinical application side of this, which is not really a central part of the original vision, but I think personally very important for us to work on. Obviously, it's a major strength at McGill that we have the possibility to connect directly to the clinics in psychiatry and neurology. and for that matter, in medicine in general. The brain is a victim of medical diseases. So the question is how to take the innovation that's bubbling in the basic science part of this and really usefully apply it. And I personally think that the idea about outcomes is one area where neurological disorders and psychiatric disorders, the outcome part of it is in a way what's holding us back in terms of application. So I think creative work there would be really interesting.
Even about things that we already know from Michael Mini's work and all that in terms of our organization of services that could make a very significant difference if from the beginning of life, if we're looking at children and adolescents, how they evolve and how they are followed and the kind of networks that we develop, being in a small city as Montreal, in collaboration with our colleagues, how we can look into different types of models and how these models study their outcome. Would that be something that would be sort of acceptable as,
Yeah, I think we expressly use the term population neuroscience to capture exactly the breadth that your question refers to. And just, I think, two comments, I think, on behalf of the whole, is I don't think you want to get too embedded in the idea of what can this grant fund specifically. It's a framework for innovation. And so, but population health, I think, is clearly a component of that. And the other thing is that I would encourage in this particular case, and I think in any case, is to contact theme or cross-sectional leaders with more specific issues related to, how a specific funding mechanism could meet the demands of a specific project. And I think, as Leslie's talking about, in the clinical or knowledge translational domain, there is something.
But you don't have to wait to be contacted in the sense that we'll be setting up opportunities for people to interact. So for sure you'll be hearing about that, and we encourage the whole clinical potentially user side of things or to bring their ideas to workshops.
So in that line, one of the things that we thought, after the grant was funded was to develop mechanisms precisely to get the input of people who would like to bring ideas to the grant and to think how we can move forward. So we're going to be developing workshops to develop the clinical part of the grant.
That was Gustavo Jarecki, who's one of the cross-cutting theme leaders.
So there are no, I understand there are no questions from online, but if there are, we'll bring them in.
I was wondering if how the themes will come into effect. Will it, with respect to distribution of funds, will you are you thinking of favoring projects that will go across multiple themes, or are you going to sort of distribute money more or less equally across the themes, or is there any plan with
I think we're
respect
going
to
to
that?
have to see what we get.
Yeah,
I
so-
don't think we have strict rules here.
So just to emphasize, there is an International College of Reviewers which is going to review these applications. And so we will get their opinion on sort of the fit to the program and the excellence of the proposals, and that there is no predefined funding formula. Since we're not a funding agency, we don't need that. We'll just look at what comes in and make decisions based on that. Yes?
I just have a very practical question, and perhaps I missed it on an earlier slide. What is the duration of this funding? And then after that, is it renewable?
It's a 7-year program, and as far as we know, it's a one-off thing, but, hard to tell.
Yeah, it depends what the budget says in 5 or so years, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not a question, but a comment. You guys mentioned College of Reviewers. I do not know if you already recruited the College of Reviewers. Getting good reviewers is difficult, and for papers, for journal papers, for grants, etc. What I recommend is to make it prestigious. And I know that you already have the label of advisory board, but something like advisory board for reviewers that will review more than one grant. They will review several, and it will be prestigious and something that they can be proud of.
Other questions?
There is one area that I think we should just mention that is going to be an important part of this program, and that's the whole area of wearable technology.
And I wondered if Leslie might want to just make a quick comment on how we can use wearable technology in different domains.
Check
and
my
how-
watch. Well, I mean, I think the idea of innovation in outcomes really comes to that, is taking our thinking from experiments in the lab to real-world observations. And one of the reasons that's been slow to go is that it produces a lot of complex data. So as long as the machine learning and artificial intelligence side, keeps up with us, that would be obviously a really exciting place to be. It's also a big step for a lot of people, so it'll be an interesting place to move forward.
Just a comment on the wearable technology. Insofar as SEAM 3 is very much focused on learning plasticity, outcomes, maybe prevention, maybe resilience is a term that's in the grant. All of that requires some kind of measurement of dependent variables, and those dependent variables could be things that you could measure with wearable technology. And I would include prominently in that portable EEG, for instance, which is really becoming, the technology is really moving ahead with that. So that presents all kinds of interesting opportunities, not only for our theme, but for all of them, but in particular, I think, for ours.
Maybe I can just add, I mean, this is true certainly for normal brain function, but I think especially for medicine, I think this is really going to be a change in the way many of us practice medicine, and as patients will be coming in with data sets. And I think one opportunity that maybe hasn't been emphasized is the CEFREF from the École Polytechnique, which is about medical devices. And so that's something that I think we should seriously consider aligning ourselves with, and it fits perfectly with the machine learning and and our CEFREF. So I think that's something we will, I would encourage us to pursue very, very strongly.
I think that's a perfect point to close on, because it really does open up the vision of a Montreal pole of excellence in neuroscience and information science, combining both our own Apogee grant, Hubble, and the EVADO at UDM, and TransMedTech at École Polytechnique. This is a unique time in Canadian neuroscience, and it's very exciting to be part of it.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Just
Philip.
a quick comment. Thank you very much for making McGill, getting this grant for McGill, and essentially moving up the essential feeling in general that things aren't so bad. So we now have these wonderful problems of how to figure out how to distribute money, as opposed to where is the money? So this is great. So I want to thank all of you very much. I know it's a lot of work to put it together, and I'm really happy it was you and not me.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. If you do have further questions and suggestions, we heard some really good thoughts today. Please send email to this address. Also, the webpage is going to have more information as we go along in terms of how to participate in this initiative. Thank you.
And let me thank all of you and our research leaders and all of you who came out today, and especially for the closing comment. I was going to make one, but you did it better for me.
You did a very good comment, yeah. Do you know a guy called Stallman?
Yes, Richard.